All right, welcome to the deep dive,
Yeah,
where we take a deep dive
that's right.
into the source material you provide and give you that shortcut
That's
to
right.
becoming really well informed.
Yeah.
And so think of us like your personal guides. We're sifting through all that info. We're
Oh,
bringing back the really crucial knowledge.
yeah, we're like those deep sea divers
Yeah.
coming up with the pearls to the
Yeah.
bottom of the ocean.
I love it.
Yeah.
And today we're diving into Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yes.
You sent this in. This is the full audiobook transcript from Audiobooks Vault on YouTube.
It's a classic.
It's a classic.
And
And
full of wisdom.
yeah, I mean, it's packed with it, right? This
Mhm.
is years of wisdom on what it really means to be effective.
It really is.
And the fact that you sent this to us, tells us that you're looking for more than just like, I don't know, like the top 10 tips for something. You're really interested in understanding, those underlying principles
That's right.
that are going to make you more effective, both in your personal life and how you interact with others.
Absolutely.
And so, our mission today on this deep dive is to unpack these foundational habits that Covey lays out,
Okay.
and really move beyond those surface level solutions.
Yeah.
And go right to that character based approach that he champions for this lasting effectiveness.
Right.
So, to kick things off, there's this key distinction that Covey makes right away that I think really sets the stage.
Yeah.
It's the difference between what he calls the personality ethic and the character ethic.
Oh, yeah. That's so interesting, isn't it?
It is.
So, the personality ethic, as he describes it, is really focused on those techniques, right? So things like how we communicate,
Yeah.
using things like affirmations, and maybe employing some of those influence tactics.
Yeah.
It's really about how you present yourself
Yeah.
and interact with others kind of on the surface.
Right. It's kind of like, I feel like we've all seen those articles online that
Yeah.
are like, here are the 3 communication tricks
Yeah,
that'll make you instantly successful. Um,
Absolutely.
um, but Covey really kind of digs into the limitations of that approach, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He says it's kind of like trying to decorate a house
Yeah.
that has a cracked foundation.
Yeah.
You can try and make it look pretty on the surface, but it's
Oh.
not going to be stable.
Yeah. You've got to fix
You got to go.
that foundation.
Yeah.
So what is that? Like, what is that? What's the deeper thing then?
Yeah. So for Covey, the trap of the personality ethic is that it's really treating the symptoms, right?
Yeah.
And not the underlying disease. And that disease, he would say, is character.
Yeah.
So it's leading to those temporary fixes,
Yeah.
and it actually ends up eroding trust.
Right.
So what we need to do is we need to go deep into the character ethic.
Okay.
And he centers that around these fundamental principles.
Such as integrity, humility, courage, justice.
Right.
These are kind of non-negotiables,
Right.
the bedrock.
Yeah.
And so what he's saying is, if you have deceit or insincerity, right, if your character is fundamentally flawed,
Yeah.
even if you use great communication techniques, they're just going to be seen as manipulative, right?
Right. And that's where that trust breaks down.
That's exactly right.
And so, going back to that analogy, it's like trying to harvest a field when you haven't actually planted any seeds.
That's it.
You can't just skip that essential work and expect a meaningful result.
No shortcuts.
There's no shortcuts to this.
No.
And Covey uses this really insightful comparison between, studying for a test
Okay.
and truly mastering a subject.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, he says that just focusing on technique is kind of like cramming for that exam, right?
Okay.
You might get that short-term result, so you get the grade,
Yeah.
but you never really internalize that knowledge.
Yeah. So you don't really understand it. You just memorized it.
Right.
And this is what he's getting at with the character ethic,
Yeah.
right? It's about consistent effort.
Yeah.
It's about living by those principles.
It's a long game.
It is a long game. It's
Yeah.
like that farmer who's got to
Yeah.
cultivate the land.
Exactly.
There are no shortcuts in natural systems.
Right.
And Covey argues that human effectiveness operates the same way
Yeah.
by these same enduring principles.
Right.
Yeah.
And he even gives this example from the business world, which I know is something you're interested in.
Okay.
Where executives are trying to like force a culture change.
Yeah.
They do it with these superficial things, right? Like,
Yeah, he talks about mandatory fun activities.
right. But they're ignoring the underlying issues.
Right. So maybe there's a lack of trust among employees,
Yeah.
and they're trying to paper over it with,
Right.
pizza parties.
Yeah. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
That's a great way of putting it.
Right. And he's saying that these initiatives, a lot of times they fail.
They do, because they're not getting to those root causes.
Yeah.
They're not aligned with the principles
Yeah.
that are necessary for a healthy and effective work environment.
Yeah. And he really brings this home with this personal story that I think really resonates with a lot of people
Well, yeah.
about his daughter's birthday party.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So he comes home and his daughter is like guarding all of her presents.
Oh.
Right? She's like not sharing with any of the other kids at her party.
Oh.
And
So what does he do?
he is like, I am a professor of like human relations.
Amazing stuff, right?
I know how to do this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so his first instinct is to try to reason with her.
Okay.
But because she didn't have that, fundamental
her
the
goods.
character
Yeah.
to want to share,
Yeah.
it was totally ineffective.
It didn't work.
And it was just this stark reminder for him, even him, with all this knowledge,
Yeah.
that in the end, it comes down to character.
It does. It really does.
Okay, so we kind of understand this difference between the personality ethic and the character ethic.
Right.
Now, how do we actually build this character?
Okay. Great question.
And that's where Covey introduces this core philosophy called the inside-out approach.
Yes.
So what is that?
So the inside-out approach, I think, is pretty self-explanatory.
Okay.
It's about starting with yourself.
Okay.
It's about focusing on your own paradigms.
Yeah.
And paradigms are basically our assumptions about the world, about ourselves, about other people.
Okay.
And then it's about your character
Yeah.
and your motives, right?
Right.
So it's looking at your inner landscape first and foremost.
Okay, so instead of, me saying like, oh, I wish my boss would do this differently, or I wish my spouse would do this differently,
Yeah,
I look at what I can do
that's it.
and how I can change.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about taking responsibility for our own sphere of influence.
And can you give us some like concrete examples of what this might look like,
Absolutely.
for the listener in their everyday life?
Yeah, so for example, Covey suggests that if you want a happier marriage,
Okay.
instead of trying to change your spouse,
Yeah.
what if you focused on being the kind of person
Yeah.
who brought positive energy to the relationship?
Right?
Or if you want more cooperative teenagers,
Yeah.
instead of trying to control them, what if you tried to be a more understanding parent?
Yeah. So it's about being the change you want to see.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm taking responsibility
Yeah.
and almost modeling the
Yeah.
behavior that I want to see in others.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
And he also talks about this idea that
Okay.
private victories precede public victories.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So that means that we have to build our own integrity first.
Okay.
So making and keeping those promises to ourselves.
Yeah. Before we can go out and establish those effective relationships with others.
So almost like I'm showing up as a whole person.
You are.
Sounds like that's all that means.
You got your own house in order.
All right.
So that you can then go out and
Yeah.
be effective in your public life.
And he contrasts this with what he calls the outside-in paradigm, right?
He does, yeah.
What is that?
So the outside-in paradigm is essentially the belief that external factors or other people need to change
Yeah.
before you can.
Right.
Yeah, so this leads to feelings of victimization.
Right.
It leads to blaming other people.
It's always someone else's fault.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it leads to stagnation
Right.
because you're just waiting for something outside of yourself to change.
Yeah. You're waiting for permission almost.
Yeah, you're giving away your power to
Yeah.
other people.
And he talks about his experiences, right, in a lot of global hotspots.
He does.
And this really kind of reinforces his conviction about this outside-in paradigm.
Yeah, so, he worked in places like South Africa and Israel and Ireland.
Yeah.
And what he saw over and over again was that when each party in a conflict believed that the other side was the problem,
Yeah.
it was really hard to find common ground.
It's like an impasse.
It is.
Yeah.
And so the inside-out approach really offers this much more empowering way forward
Right.
by saying, let me focus on what I can control, which is myself.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the inside-out approach.
Right.
And that's really, I think, how we start to build this effectiveness.
It is.
But then he brings in this concept of habits.
Right.
So what exactly is a habit according to Covey?
So for Covey, a habit is the intersection of three things:
Okay.
knowledge, skill, and desire.
Okay.
So knowledge is that theoretical understanding. It's knowing what to do and why.
Yeah.
Skill is the practical competence, so how to actually do it.
Yeah.
And desire is the motivation, so wanting to do it.
Right. So I can't just know that I should work out.
This
I
guy,
should actually want to work out.
you got it. So all three of those are necessary for a habit
Okay.
to really form.
Right.
It's not enough to just know.
Yeah.
You actually have to want to do it.
And he gives this example of listening.
He does, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So you might know intellectually
Yeah.
that you should listen to other people.
Right.
It's important for building relationships.
Yes.
You might even know some techniques for deep listening.
Right.
But if you don't have that desire,
Yeah.
that genuine desire to understand the other person,
Yeah.
it's not going to become a habit.
Right.
You're not going to be able to do it consistently.
It's almost like that willpower muscle gets fatigued after a while.
It does. And he talks about how the development of these habits is an upward spiral.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Yeah. So he says, as we nurture our knowledge, our skill, and our desire in these areas,
Yeah.
we actually start to break free from those old ways of thinking and behaving. And we move up
Right.
to higher levels of effectiveness.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a process of learning, doing, and growing.
Right. It's not just like a
It's not a one-time thing.
one and done kind of thing.
No, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
It's a cycle.
Okay. And I think this really kind of sets the stage for us to start digging into those specific habits.
I think so too.
But he also introduces this principle that I think is so important for sustaining effectiveness,
Okay.
which is the idea of the production capability balance,
Yes, that's a good one.
the PTC balance.
Yeah, the PPC.
And he uses this really clever metaphor to describe it.
Tell me about it.
So he talks about a goose
Uh,
that lays golden eggs.
I love that.
Right.
Okay.
And so the golden eggs are the production, right? That's like
Yeah, this is the output, right? The results.
tangible results.
Yeah,
And the goose represents the production capability.
right.
Which is, what is that?
So that's the asset.
Yeah.
It's the resource that allows you to get those results.
Yeah. Okay.
So that could be your physical health.
Yeah.
It could be your relationships,
Yes.
your skills and knowledge, your mental well-being.
Yeah. So it's all of those things that actually make you able to
Right.
be productive.
To produce.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what's the secret then to maintaining this balance, right? Because
Yeah.
I can't just focus on the goose
Well,
and I can't just focus on the eggs, right?
yeah. So effectiveness
Yeah.
hinges on finding this balance
Yeah.
between getting the golden eggs,
Right. Right.
but also taking care of the goose
Yeah.
that lays those eggs.
And what happens if you don't? Right. What if you just focus on production?
Yeah. So if you neglect the goose
Yeah.
and you're just focused on those eggs,
Yeah.
you're going to burn out, right?
You're gonna kill it.
kill the goose.
Yeah.
You're going to deplete your resources,
Right.
and then you're not going to be able to get any more eggs.
Yeah. It's like that short-term thinking.
Exactly. Short-term gain for long-term pain.
Yeah. And he gives this great example about a machine.
Right. Yeah. So if you're constantly pushing that machine to its limits
Yeah.
without giving it any maintenance,
Right.
it's going to break down.
Right. Eventually it's just going to stop working.
Yeah.
And what about in our own lives, right? Like, what does
Yeah.
that look like?
So for example, if you are someone who's working really hard
Yeah.
and you're not taking care of your health,
Yeah.
you're eventually going to get sick,
Yeah.
right? Or if you're so focused on your career
Yeah.
that you're neglecting your relationships,
Yeah.
that's going to have negative consequences down the road.
Yeah. Those relationships are going to suffer.
They are.
Yeah.
So we have to find that balance.
Right.
We have to invest in ourselves
Okay.
in order to be able to produce.
And what about the opposite? Like, what if you focus too much on the goose?
Yeah, so Covey also says that just focusing on the goose and not getting any eggs
Yeah.
isn't effective either. He talks about the person who spends hours every day exercising and
Yeah.
boasting about how long they're going to live.
Yeah.
But they're not actually living their life.
Right. They're not enjoying it.
You're not producing anything.
Yeah.
Or someone who's constantly learning new skills
Yeah.
but never actually applies them.
Right. It's just information in, no information out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the balance is crucial.
It is.
It's really about finding that sweet spot.
And he says that this is really the essence
It is.
of effectiveness.
That's the essence of effectiveness, yeah.
Yes.
It's that balance
Yeah.
between the short term and the long term.
Right. And I think that really sets us up beautifully to talk about habit one.
Okay.
But before we get into those specifics, Covey talks about the importance of paradigm shifts
He does, yeah.
and introduces this concept of proactivity.
Right.
Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so paradigms are basically our mental maps.
Okay.
They're the way that we see the world,
Okay.
the way we interpret it.
Right.
And he contrasts deterministic maps.
Okay.
So things like environmental determinism, the belief that our environment controls us,
Yeah.
or stimulus response theory,
Okay.
which says that we just react to external triggers.
So we're just at the whim of whatever is happening around us.
We're not in control.
Yeah.
And he contrasts that with a proactive model.
Right, which is so much more empowering.
It is.
Right, because
Yeah.
I'm in control
Yeah.
of how I respond to those things.
Exactly. It's that space between stimulus and response
Yeah.
where we actually have the power to choose.
And he gives this incredibly powerful story of Viktor Frankl.
He does, yeah.
Yes.
Who was a Holocaust survivor.
Right.
And in the concentration camps, he discovered what he called the last of the human freedoms,
Yes.
which is that power to choose our response.
Right, even when you're in the most horrible, unimaginable
He
condition.
found this freedom
Yeah.
to choose his response.
And that's what allowed him to not only survive, but thrive in a way, right?
He did.
Found meaning
Yeah.
in the midst of that suffering.
Yeah, and it was inspiring to the people around him,
Yeah.
even to some of the guards in the camp.
Yeah. And Covey emphasizes that Frankl really utilized those
Yeah.
unique human endowments that we have.
Those gifts, yeah, right.
Like self-awareness,
Yeah.
imagination, conscience.
Yes.
And it was this that allowed him to be proactive.
Yeah.
And so what is proactivity?
So proactivity is about taking responsibility for our lives
Okay.
instead of blaming circumstances or other people.
So I'm not a victim
You are not.
of my circumstances.
No,
Is that
you
fair?
have the power to choose your response.
I love that.
And he contrasts reactive language.
Okay.
Like, there's nothing I can do.
Right.
He makes me so mad.
Yeah.
With proactive language, like,
Yeah.
let's look at our alternatives.
Okay.
I control my feelings.
Right.
So it's about taking ownership.
Yeah. So reactive language is that victim mentality.
It is.
Yeah.
And proactive language is that ownership mentality.
I love that.
Yeah.
And he also talks about the circle of concern and the circle of influence.
Yes.
And he's saying that proactive people focus on that circle of influence.
That's right. So that's the things that we can actually do something about.
Right.
Reactive people focus on the circle of concern.
Right. Which is much bigger.
It's huge.
Right. And I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And that leads to feeling helpless and overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
And he gives that really great example of Gandhi.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So Gandhi, while everyone else was complaining about the British,
Yeah.
he was actually doing something about it.
Right.
He was expanding his circle of influence
Yeah.
through these very principled actions.
Yeah. And eventually he brought about massive change.
He did.
And Covey actually issues a challenge to the listener, right?
He does, yeah.
To really put this principle into practice.
A 30-day challenge.
30 days. It's proactivity.
That's right.
And he's saying for 30 days, just focus on your circle of influence.
Yeah, focus on the things you can control.
Okay.
Make and keep small commitments. Be a light. Be a model.
Yeah.
Be part of the solution, not the problem.
I love that.
Yeah,
Okay, so we've laid that groundwork, right? We've talked about the character ethic.
right.
We've talked about this inside-out approach, the PPC balance,
Yeah.
and the importance of proactivity.
Absolutely.
Now we're ready to dig into those 7 habits.
I'm ready.
Okay, and the first one is begin with the end in mind.
A great one.
So what is this all about?
So this habit is really based on the principle that mental creation precedes physical creation.
Okay,
So just like an architect would create a blueprint before building a house,
right.
effective people envision their outcomes
Yeah.
before taking any action.
So they have that clear vision of what they want to create.
That's it.
Yeah.
And Covey distinguishes here between leadership
Okay.
and management. So leadership, he says, is the first creation.
Okay.
It's the envisioning,
Right.
and management is the second creation.
Okay.
It's doing.
So almost like leadership is the strategy and management is the tactics.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Covey says this habit's really about personal leadership, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's about getting clear on your values
Yeah.
and your goals.
Okay.
And he talks about developing a personal mission statement,
Yes, he does.
which he calls your personal constitution.
Okay.
So it's those deeply held values
Yeah.
that guide your life.
And so what's the best way to, create this personal mission statement?
Yeah, so Covey says that we actually detect rather than invent our mission.
What does that mean?
So it's not something that we just come up with.
Okay.
It's something that's already there inside of us.
Okay.
We have this inner monitor,
Yeah.
this conscience
Okay.
that gives us insights into our potential
Okay.
our talents, our
Right.
purpose.
So it's almost like I have to uncover it rather than create it.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about tapping into that inner wisdom.
And then he says, write it down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and review it regularly.
Regularly.
Keep it at the forefront of your mind
Okay.
because it's so easy to get caught up
Yeah.
in the day-to-day,
In the busyness.
in the busyness,
Yeah.
and lose sight of what's truly important.
Right. And so this mission statement reminds me of what's important.
It is your compass
Yeah.
guiding you back.
It's like my North Star.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And he also talks about
Yeah.
the idea that people can center their lives around different things.
Yes, he does.
Right, like, their spouse, their family,
Mhm.
money, possessions, work.
Work, yeah.
And he says that these centers actually have limitations.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can create a lot of insecurity.
Right, because what happens when you lose your job?
Exactly. Or if your spouse leaves you.
Or yeah.
And so he recommends adopting a principle-centered paradigm.
Yes.
And why is that?
So a principle-centered paradigm is really based on those timeless universal principles.
Okay.
So things like honesty, fairness, integrity,
Right.
these things don't change.
Right. And they're true no matter what.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when you base your life on principles,
Yeah.
you're not as easily swayed
Yeah.
by those external circumstances.
Yeah. You're not constantly reacting.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're more grounded.
And he also talks about the importance of visualization and affirmations.
Oh, yeah, those are powerful tools.
They are.
Yeah.
And how do they tie into this habit?
So visualization is about creating a mental picture
Okay.
of what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
And affirmations are those positive statements
Yeah.
that reinforce your goals.
Okay.
And what they do is they help you to kind of program your subconscious mind.
Right. It's like you're getting your mind ready for that outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he talks about Dr. Charles Garfield,
Yeah.
who studied peak performers.
Yeah.
And he found that they all use visualization
Yeah.
to enhance their performance.
It's so interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
And he even tells this story about a football player.
Oh, yeah. I love this one.
Yeah, so this football player mentally rehearsed
Mhm.
successful plays
Yeah.
and the feeling of relaxation.
Yeah.
And it helped him to improve his performance.